Every day, Australian unions are out there providing a voice for their 2 million members and all workers about rights at work, job security, wages and conditions, health and safety, work-life balance, and a fairer, more equitable Australia. To deepen the level of engagement with the community and young people, the Australian Council of Trade Unions teamed up with OurSay and its nearly 12,000 users to crowdsource questions online on the current state of working life in Australia and what role unions should play in keeping with the ACTU's Secure Jobs, Better Future campaign. A particular focus of this OurSay was the 40% of Australians who are in casual, labour hire and contract forms of work, with few conditions, protections and entitlements of permanent employees, like sick leave, annual leave or superannuation. The forum's 50 questions focused on workers' freedom of choice in their type of employment, educating the workforce about their rights, and Australia's employment future in an unstable global economy. After 800 votes were cast, OurSay's 3 most popular user questions were then answered at the inaugural ACTU Youth Congress at Sydney Trades Hall on the 14th of May by ACTU President Ged Kearney as part of a panel discussion. Others on the panel were ACTU Youth Committee Chair Josh Peake, National Union of Workers Organiser Godfrey Mose, and Australian Services Union Delegate Leah Webber.
Hello everyone, my name's Sarah McDonald and welcome to the OurSay section of the gathering today. The third place question with exactly 100 votes was asked by Richard Walker, and it is this. He didn't provide us with a biography, but he works with Friends of Starts, which helps refugees build new lives in Australia and recover from the trauma of their past lives. They raise funds and awareness about refugee issues and help refugees integrate into the new environment in Australia. So Richard's question is, Australia has skills shortages, yet there are many refugees with overseas qualifications and the skills to work in industries which overseas workers are currently employed to fill. With the ever-increasing need for local work experience, how can newly arrived refugees hope to enter the Australian workforce? Ged, would you like to start?
It's a vexed question, isn't it? It's a really hard question. There's lots of layers to that because the first part of the question is how do we help asylum seekers and refugees who come and get permanent residency actually use the skills that they've gained in their home country to get decent work here and their qualifications. And then the second part of that question is about employers' propensity to resort to immigrant labour, and particularly 457s, to fill so-called job shortages rather, when we have people here who could actually do those jobs. So it's quite a complex question. I think as far as the union movement goes, we haven't always really supported overseas workers, but more lately, of course, I'm very proud to say that we've taken this up with great gusto, and we have. The union movement's preference certainly is for permanent migration and permanent residency, so that when people get here from day one, they get all of the rights and all of the opportunities that a permanent resident should get. And that should apply also for asylum seekers who are granted residency here as well. We know that there are a great deal of people who, Josh was just telling me, there's doctors, a doctor he knows that's cleaning his office's buildings. I'm not sure where you said he was from, Josh, but certainly came here from overseas. There's taxi drivers who are accountants. There's, people working in all sorts of jobs who have qualifications. And I do recognise that Australia has standards. We have very high standards in our qualified areas that need to be met. And if people don't meet those, there are good reasons, I guess, why they don't get the final qualifications. But if they are here as permanent residents and if they do have these backgrounds, there's no reason why we shouldn't have programs that can support them to they'll fill the gap in actually meeting the standards that we require. I certainly know from nursing, I come from a nursing background, the union was constantly approached from people who had done nursing qualifications in other countries and wanted to be nurses here. And we worked very, very hard in nursing to actually set up programs whereby they could do courses to actually upskill and meet the standards here. So I don't see why we can't do that for a great deal of qualifications for whatever industry, and it's certainly something that we probably should look at. As far as 457s go, using short-term labour to fill the skills shortages, there's so much that is problematic about that approach. It is short-termism. We know that it has been used by employers to drive down wages, local wages and conditions. We know that there's very little effort to make sure that there aren't people in Australia who could actually fill those jobs. There's no proof, there's no real proof to say that there are massive skills shortages. This is a big problem for us. The people that do come on 457s more often than not are open to such terrible exploitation because they have that sickle hanging over their head. While you're here on a temporary visa, we can send you home at the drop of a hat if you don't do what we want. I know, for example, going back again to my experience as working in the nurses' union, a group of nurses were flown over from South Africa. They landed on the promise that they would get here, work as registered nurses, have good jobs. They landed in Sydney. They had half an hour between their flights, their connecting flights from Sydney to Melbourne. In that half an hour, the recruitment company presented them with contracts and said, sign these contracts in the next 10 minutes or we send you home. You don't get your next flight down to Melbourne where your job is. Now, luckily, some of them came to us with those contracts and they were abominable. I can't tell you how important. They wouldn't meet any, really, standard here. So that's the sort of exploitation I think that people are open to. And a lot of these people sell their homes, they give up everything before they come here too. So, it is an area that is really complex. It's difficult to deal with, but the union movement has very firm views around the fact that there should be strong labour market testing before anyone is allowed to bring immigrant labour in, that if they do bring short-term immigrant labour in, that there has to be a training commitment to train, apprenticeships and upskill people and do everything they can to help people shift to where the jobs are. Because unfortunately, as we all know, labour is not nearly as mobile as capital, and that's a fact. So we have to do a great deal more about getting people to where the jobs are.
Let's move to our second question from the OurSay votes. The second place question with 152 votes was asked by Aisha Kane. She's a third year art student at Melbourne University, majoring in international relations and media and communications. She grew up in a single income household in Melbourne's West and says she's the Education Public Affairs Officer for the Melbourne Uni Student Union and she works casually at Woolies. Here's Aisha's question. Women are overrepresented in part-time and casual work. As of September 2011, there were 722,600 underemployed part-time workers. 62% of them were women. What can we do to ensure that women are supported in their workplace to seek qualifications and promotions and not discriminated against because of their sex?
Okay. I feel like this is a bit of a Dorothy Dixer, really, but it was voted for because people were like, this is a fantastic question because it's pretty much at the very heart of our latest campaign, which is around secure work. Women are overrepresented in insecure work. There's no doubt about that. We all know the reasons why, because women still predominantly share a large part of caring responsibilities. They take time out, as you know. There's a myriad of reasons for this, but when we did our survey of workers, the thing that women told us is they needed to access this type of work because they had caring responsibilities, not only for children, but for older parents, and more and more this was coming the case. And the only work they could get to get that flexibility is this casual, insecure style of work where they actually forego all their rights. And it's really annoying when you hear employers putting themselves up as the heroes because they say, aren't we good? We supply this casual work to the women because they need flexibility. Aren't we great? It really annoys me because the question is, why can't I have that flexibility? Why can't I have those jobs that work around my life and still have rights and still have secure income and still have predictable hours? So it truly is flexible for me. So that's that's really the big rhetoric that we have to overcome, is that the employers aren't the heroes here for keeping women in casual jobs where they are insecure and they have no rights. So it's something that we really have to address, and we've looked at it in several ways. What we're going to debate at Congress in the next few days over the secure jobs issue is going to highlight a lot of these things. One of the main things, I think, is that the Fair Work Act in our industrial legislation is still in some ways very much written for the harvester man, you know, the male breadwinner, the good wife at home and the 2 kids. It doesn't really reflect the fact that these days, well, don't know the statistic, but I'm sure somebody here will, that most households are dual income, that there are single parent families, that there are single women who have responsibilities for older parents and vice versa, that there's a huge diversity of a workforce now, and our industrial legislation has to reflect that. And one major issue is, you know, the right to request flexible work arrangements when you go back to work, for example, from having kids, from maternity leave. Right now, sure, the legislation says you can request it, but it doesn't say that the employer has to respond in a positive way. And if the employer says no, that's it. You have no recourse to challenge that or ask why, etc. There's lots of other things that we're going to be debating in Congress around this issue. It's legislation. It's about actually being able to have jobs where you can have some secure income, where you can predict your hours and where you can actually plan your life. It may not necessarily be about permanency. That's not necessarily the answer to this. It's about, when you ask people what it is that they want some surety, as I said, over hours, over income, and that if they are sick, they get access to some sort of to paid leave around those things, and some holidays as well. So really, this question is at the very crux of what the whole Secure Jobs, Better Future campaign's about.
All right, well, let's go to the number one question. It was 156 votes. It was asked by David Haynes, and David says, I'm a student at the Uni of Melbourne, majoring in economics, and a committee member and writer for the Economic Student Society of Australia, a student-driven organisation which aims to explore economic concepts and events in a simple and accessible way. Here's his question. The ACTU is on record as strongly supporting government subsidies to industries that have been adversely impacted by the high Aussie dollar, most notably for manufacturing. You've clearly stated these subsidies should be aimed at retaining such industries in their current form for the duration of the high dollar. Given most economists predict the dollar will remain high over the medium to long term, would it not be better to focus government support on assisting uncompetitive companies to transition into new industries, as well as retraining workers with a view to creating efficient, sustainable companies that can compete without taxpayer-funded assistance? Quite a mouthful.
I agree wholeheartedly. This is about our future. We have to have a viable manufacturing sector if we are to survive post-mining boom. Absolutely no doubt about that. And who else's role is it to make sure that happens except the government? I think that that's an important role. Josh is absolutely right that manufacturing is critical to that. It needs to be supported, and we're not, you know, we're not Robinson Crusoe in supporting our manufacturing sector. It employs 1 million people. 1 million people, and it's much better to support the industries to keep those people in jobs rather than have them out of jobs. The flow-on effect for manufacturing is probably 5 times fold that the people it keeps in jobs. But I think that there's an inherent problem with the question. You know, it's not necessarily ACTU policy to support subsidies that just maintain the industry as it is. We do support an evolving industry. If you go back to the 80s with the big button plans and the big, you know, looking forward, what are we going to do with our industries? They made the decision, okay, we're going to stop making cars. We might make engines, but we're going to stop making cars. I'm not sure exactly what it was. What do we need to transform that? And the subsidies went a long way to making sure that the whole car industry transformed itself into being something that was viable, was sustainable, and provided jobs. We do support subsidies that actually help industries transform and help them innovate and help them move on. But you can't just see the subsidies in isolation. There are a whole pile of other policies that the government has in place that we, the union movement, have promoted to make sure that we have a viable manufacturing sector. There's $10 billion in the carbon coming out of the carbon price that is actually going to go into innovation and building new industries, new manufacturing industries for Australia. There's the whole Ken Henry paper on the Asian century right now. Have you been having a look at that? It's really worth having a look what he's doing. It's quite exciting because he's asking the question, what are we going to produce in 20, 30 years' time? What is it that is going to value add for Australian manufacturing? We should be gearing up for that. There's a lot of talk about food manufacturing at the moment, food packaging. Are we going to be the food bowl? And there is, there is room, we think, for a plan, another manufacturing plan that is coming in place right now that will support the future of manufacturing. And that is why we support subsidising manufacturing, and I think that's important.
The ACTU says the OurSay collaboration was a valuable exercise in helping understand people's feelings towards the role of unions and the future of work in Australia. It was also an important part of the union movement's ongoing commitment to transparency and engagement with all Australians. How did you feel about the OurSay process?